Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Through the Fire. I am your host, Ryan Wickline, and today we are joined by a very special guest. She is the author of The Other Side of the Gun, Miss Susan Snow. How you doing today, Susan?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it is my pleasure. I mean, you have an amazing story.
Well, thank you.
All right, well, let's dive into this. Let the audience kind of hear about it. So, can you tell us how your life changed on Halloween night in 1985?
Oh, yeah. Well, strap yourself in. um, well, just to start out, I was a normal 17-year-old girl. My world revolved around my boyfriend, who I had been dating 3 months, and friends. And I just happened to have a Los Angeles police detective father. And that morning, he actually went and he was testifying in a case that he was the lead detective on. I, however, wanted to go to a Halloween party that night, but it was on a school night, and my dad said, nope, not happening. So the plan was that he was going to go after work or after testifying, he was going to go and pick my brother up from school, who my brother was 6 at the time. And then he would come home, and at that point, I would try to schmooze my parents into allowing me to go to this party. Unfortunately, I didn't get that chance. As I was getting ready and my mom had come home, the phone rang. And I thought it was for me. Being a teenager, I thought it was one of my friends calling me. So I ran to the phone, and this was when they were still attached to the wall. I picked it up, and it wasn't for me. It was a lady from my brother's school. And all she said was that there was a drive-by shooting and my dad was involved. So at that point, my mom had rounded the corner, and I just handed her the phone the fastest I could. I watched her kind of listen. I tried to listen in, and I watched her as she was talking to this woman. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but watching her body language, it told me that it was not good. She got off the phone and she looked at me and said, "We're going to the school." So I said, "All right." And we got in the car. It's about a 7-minute drive. And we got to the school. It was after 5. So at that point in October, it was pretty dark outside. We parked in a parking lot that was kind of in the middle of the school, but the kids got out on the back side of the school. So that's where we headed. As we headed there, it looked like daylight because there were so many police cars and their lights were lit up the sky. There was an ambulance in the street just sitting there. We kept walking, and then both of us, from the corner of our eye, we saw my dad's truck. So we started to run towards it. As we got closer, there was glass on the ground. And as we rounded the corner, there he was, partially covered up in a white sheet. At that point, I saw my mom drop to her knees and start screaming. And I stood there frozen, not being able to comprehend what I was seeing. So what I ended up doing is hyper-focusing on the ambulance. And the conversation in my head was, where is everyone and why isn't anyone helping him? A little bit, probably was seconds later, we had 2 police officers come up, grab us by our arms, and escort us back into the school. And we went to the office. My mom was taken aside by some detectives. At this point, I had no idea where my brother was. I don't know what he saw. I didn't know if he was hurt. I had no information whatsoever. I sat down in the chair in the office, and as I was sitting there just trying to comprehend everything that was going on around me, because it was very chaotic. 2 ladies were talking that worked at the school, and the one lady said to the other that my dad was deceased. And that's when it hit me. I wanted to jump up out of that chair and I wanted to run as far as I could away from the situation and the scene and everything. But as I sat in the chair, I felt like my entire body was filled with cement and I couldn't move. And my mom came up to me and she said, "I'm sending you with a neighbor." Now, I know part of me wanted to leave. Part of me wanted to run out of there. But the kid part of me wanted to stay with my family unit. I needed to know that I wasn't alone in this. And unfortunately, I didn't get that chance. So I was sent with a neighbor. When we rolled up into our neighborhood, I didn't recognize it. It was just completely filled with law enforcement. There were helicopters overhead. You know, I went from the normal teenage girl that morning to this at night. My poor neighbor had no idea how to handle me. Like, I was beside myself. Um, this was the mid 80s. There was no resources for kids. LAPD didn't have any resources for kids at the time. And our poor neighbor lady had known my parents for a really long time. So she was trying to comprehend everything that was going on, and try to support me at the same time. And at that time, all I wanted was my boyfriend. So she called him and she didn't tell him a whole lot. When he showed up at her front door, it was typical, like, grab your jacket, grab your purse, what hospital is he at? Where's your mom? Where's your brother? And I just stood at the door and the words could not come out of my mouth. And the more persistent he got for us to leave, I finally blurted it out. "He's gone." And he said, "What do you mean he's gone?" I said, "He's gone. He's not at a hospital." And at that point, I watched my 19-year-old boyfriend crumble right in front of me. And we just kind of sat in my neighbor's house crying and not knowing what our next steps were. We had no idea. It wasn't just the police department, it wasn't just law enforcement that were in our neighborhood. This was the first time that a Los Angeles police officer had been assassinated. And so the media ascended as well. So not only was I dealing with and reeling with the loss of my dad, the trauma of seeing him, having to navigate this kind of by myself. I also had the fact that I could not grieve privately. Like, when we did go home to my house and walked to my house, there were police officers all over my backyard, front yard. I had to tell them who I was. And I went into the house and my house was filled with people. I had no idea who they were. I could hear my mom in the background talking, but nobody really, when I walked through the door, nobody, these were strangers mostly, and they didn't know who I was. So I did what a kid does. I ran to my room and I hid. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to answer any questions. I just wanted to be with my boyfriend by myself. And I stayed there all night. My boyfriend ended up leaving. And I stayed in my room the whole night. I didn't sleep. I just looked out the window in the morning and it was daylight. And when I looked out the window, I still saw police presence everywhere. I saw my brother. I could hear him through the night crying. but I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even lift my head off my pillow. I just had nothing left. And when I did see him, it was about 11 o'clock the next morning. I was able to hug him and tell him that we were going to get through this. But that was the first time I could even see him and acknowledge him. So they didn't catch the men that were involved. This was a long time planned out assassination of my dad in retaliation for his testimony. So we had police presence for that 6 days. I had bodyguards that went with me wherever I went. My friends who came to visit were interrogated all the time. And, at the same time, the PTSD had set in the first couple of days. I was in a deep depression. I had anxiety through the roof because my dad was my protector. I knew that nothing could happen to me or hurt me because my dad was around. And he was always my protector. And he was always my voice of reason and the present parent. He was very present and made you feel like you were the most important person in that room when he was talking to you. And that was now gone. And I didn't know how to live with that. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had panic attacks. I had no tools, no idea how to calm myself down. So I was in a constant state of anxiety. And this went on. They finally caught him 6 days later, and then the police presence left.
Yeah. What was your mindset like going from just like a normal teenager to that night, just drastically your father's murdered, and you got cops are surrounding you and protecting you because there's a hit out pretty much essentially on your guys' life too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we didn't know that until much later. It came out in the trials. There was 2 trials because there were so many defendants. I honestly, I didn't know how to handle it. I think for me, I just felt like I lived in a fog and I was existing. I wasn't living. You pushed me in a direction and that's the direction I went, you know. And this was a time where there was no talk of mental health. And like I said, there were no resources. And my kid brain thought, I felt like I was going crazy. That's how it felt. Like all of a sudden, all of this stuff is permeating my being. And I didn't know how to stop all the things that were going on. And I didn't know what suicidal ideation was either, but I knew that I had this longing to be with my dad, and I didn't care how that happened. So it was very difficult in that aspect. I just didn't know, my mind was if you went to a therapist, you were nuts. I didn't want to tell people either what was going on internally because I was afraid they would just throw me in a loony bin and
Yeah.
call it a day.
Yeah, because that's how things were back then. I mean, like
Yeah.
late 80s, 90s, all
Yeah.
that was, I mean, you were looked at as weak if you went and seen a therapist or had problems. And like, I know I was taught at that young of age, you just bury everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm a Gen Xer too, so it was, suck it up, buttercup. It's,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But at the same time, I was also yearning for somebody to guide me, to help me move through these emotions that I was dealing with. And unfortunately, um, for myself, because my brother was there, because my dad saved his life, he told him to duck down in the truck as my dad was putting him in the truck. And he knew what was coming. So he told my brother to duck down. His experience is way different than mine. But because of that, all the focus was on my mother and my brother. And so be it. Like,
Yeah.
of course. However, I was not acknowledged by media for 2 days. They did not know that he had a teenage daughter for 2 days, which made me feel like between being sent off with the neighbor and having to navigate all of this stuff myself to not being acknowledged even by, I mean, I had 17 years with this man and not being acknowledged, I felt like a disconnect. I felt like I wasn't important in this scenario, you know.
Yeah.
And that was isolating in itself. But again, yes, I was taught if you go to a therapist, you're either nuts, you're crazy, you're out of sort, or you're weak. And it was after the funeral, LAPD came to us and they said, we want to pay for therapy for all three of you separately. So, like I said, I didn't know a whole lot about therapy, but my mom kind of voluntold me that I was going.
So did it help you? Did therapy help you at all back then?
No, unfortunately, the gentleman that I had to go see, he was not what I call trauma competent, nor was he trauma informed. And I really feel in hindsight, he did not want to dip his toes into the weeds with me. So when I did go to see him, our sessions were very generalized. It was all talk therapy and it was all about my relationship with my mom, my relationship with my brother, my boyfriend, and school. And that was it.
And not even getting into what was
No.
really bothering you.
Yeah. And I was not at an age, even though I was 17 and just kind of on that cusp of becoming an adult, I still was a child. And so, because of that, I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I didn't know how to say, here's what's going on with me. Here's how I'm feeling today. I didn't know unless you asked me questions that would move me in that direction. It didn't happen. So every week I saw him for a year. And every week I would say, today's the day. He's going to say something. He's going to do something. He's going to help me feel better. And it didn't happen. So after a year of seeing him, he looked at me and he said, Susan, you're a well-rounded young lady and you're going to be fine for the rest of your life. And I don't need to see you anymore. I walked out of his office thinking, okay, I've snapped. I'm
Unreal.
crazy. I'm done. I'm cooked, right? And I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to deal with all of the emotions and the things and the triggers and the things that come up for me. I don't know how to deal with that, but I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to have to figure it out. Like, I have no choice. And what I ended up doing, not healthy, mind you, is I created an emotional mask. And I talk about masking a lot, but my mask was based off of what people said I was. So people would say things like, oh, Susan, you're so brave, or Susan, you're so strong, right? And that was my mask. That's what the people on the exterior saw from me. They didn't see I was a hot mess. Like I had all kinds of things going on. I was not a healthy person. However, the people on the outside didn't see that part of me. The only person that really kind of saw that part of me was my boyfriend. Because he was there that night, you know. I lived in fight, flight, freeze, and fawn for 14 years of my life. And because of that, you know, when you're in that unhealed part of you, it's hard to recognize relationships that are for your best good, your highest best good. So I would be friends with people that would not treat me very well, or they would treat me with disrespect, or, you know, I had a circle of friends that were great, you know, but there were outside people that would not treat me very nicely, and I couldn't see it. And there's a chapter in my book called Rose Colored Glasses, because that's what I just walked around in those glasses thinking that everything was good. And, you know, people wanted to be friends with me, and that's good, right? But I couldn't decipher what was healthy and what was not. I mean, even my relationship with my mother at home was very toxic. And I didn't know how to stop that. I didn't know how to put boundaries down with that either. And so, you know, I feel like in that too, I had this feeling of almost like obligation, like expectation, not obligation, expectation. So, for instance, you know, when my husband, now husband, I married the boyfriend, by the way, and we're still together 40 years later. Um, but when we married each other, it was like we had been dating 5 years, and people were like, "Well, it's about time." You know, there was that expectation. We were still young, 21 and 24. Like we were still young, but there was that expectation, right? You get married, you're expected to get married. You live together, you date, you get married, you have children, right? And I didn't know how to advocate for myself. Didn't have to say, "You know what? This doesn't feel right to me. Like I don't feel like I'm ready yet. I'm not mature enough to be married." Nor was he. Like we were both in the same boat in that. And, you know, and that has been a journey in itself, just our relationship. And definitely, you know, in the 14 years, I just got to a point where in Southern California, I always looked behind my back, was always waiting for the shoe to drop. Um, People knew my story, you know, and I thought, you know, at that point we had two small children, and I needed to distance myself from that part of my life. And the funny part is that I thought if I moved to Colorado, that I could leave all of that behind. Like it wasn't going to follow me. Funny, haha.
Yeah.
But I just thought I'm going to leave all that behind. I'm just going to start anew. We're going to go to a new state. No one's going to know my story, and we're going to be able to start over like it never happened. And it's funny when you do that because the universe says, "Yeah, no, no, you're not done yet. You're actually not even started yet."
Yeah,
And
you can't run from yourself.
you can't. And what happened was when I came here to Colorado, I was a hairdresser. I was a master stylist. And I came here, I was working in a salon that was very close to Littleton, Colorado. I worked the day of April 20th of 1999. Was doing a client's hair, and I put her under the dryer, went into the back room, turned on the TV in our break room, and up popped the live coverage of the Columbine shootings. I stood there. I had flashbacks of the night my dad was killed. I saw the police cars. I saw the ambulances at a school with kids that were about my same age. And it all came flooding back to me. Now, I turned pale white. Like I felt the tingling in my fingers when you're starting to have a panic attack. I knew it was coming. And I just didn't understand what was happening to me. Because remember, I was told I was going to be fine for the rest of my life. So my colleague was standing there looking at me like, what is happening to you? And I couldn't answer her. I said, I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know. And she left the room, and I did what I always do. I put that emotional mask back on. And I kept telling myself, this has nothing to do with me. I don't have kids that go there. It's not my neighborhood. Like, I tried desperately to disconnect myself from the situation. And I kept telling myself, tomorrow's going to be a different day, and I'm going to be okay. Like, this is going to go away for me. But for right now, I'm going to be stoic. I'm going to put my mask on, and nobody's going to see the turmoil. And I did that, and I finished the day, and everybody around me was angry and crying and emotional, and I was nothing. Like I just went about my day like it was any other day. Not in a heartless way, but just in a pretend way. And I left that night to go home, and everything came flooding back. I stopped sleeping. I felt this time it was worse, and I felt like I was literally spiraling. And I didn't know what to do. And the suicidal ideation came back. This time it was different, though, because there was a part of me that didn't want to feel like this anymore. I didn't want to feel the pain anymore. But then there was a part of me that's a mom, and I didn't want to leave my kids. And I didn't know how to deal with it. I just kept telling myself every day, like, oh, tomorrow will feel better. Tomorrow will feel better. And it didn't happen. My husband, being the smart man that he is, he stopped me at the door one day, and he said, Susan, you have two choices. You either go get help today, or I'm putting you in a hospital. At that point, I was just beside myself. And I put up that white flag. I said, I give up. I'm surrendering. I will do whatever it takes. And I did. I made an appointment with a physician that day, and I went to see him, and he put me on antidepressants because that's what they do. And then he handed me a business card, and it was a business card of a trauma therapist. And I just laughed in his face. This didn't work 14 years ago. What makes you think it's going to work this time? And he said, honestly, you have no choice. So I said, okay, you're right. I've surrendered, and I need to go do this. And I made an appointment, and I sat down with her. And in the first 3 minutes of our session, just getting to know each other, I felt like it was different. She was the first person in my life to actually ask me the questions that I had longed to hear when I was 17. And because she asked me those questions, I was able to be vulnerable with her. And I was really able to dive down deep and tell her everything I was dealing with when I was 17 and what I was currently dealing with. And she sat there and she listened intently to me. And then she looked me in the face and said, Susan, everything you've gone through since you were 17 is normal because you have PTSD. But what you need to understand is PTSD isn't something that just goes away. It's something you learn to manage. And that was it for me. I was like, you mean I'm not crazy? I can heal from this? Like, I had such hope in that moment. That was such a turning point for me that I felt like, one, I wasn't alone. I finally found the adult, the person that was going to guide me, and I wasn't alone in this, and I was going to be able to rise up from it. I was going to be able to heal from it. And I was so grateful in that moment. Really
Yeah.
grateful.
So what kind of helped you manage the PTSD?
Well, when we first met each other, she knew I was a hot mess. Like she knew I had so many things going on with me, and she didn't want to just throw the kitchen sink at me, right? So we kind of bit it off, like, you bite the elephant one bite at a time.
Yeah.
It was kind of it. And so she asked me, she said, what is the one thing you're struggling with right now that if we address it, that it will make you feel better? And at the time, I wasn't sleeping. So she said, well, let me tell you what sleep does for people who deal with this stuff. It's imperative that your body rests. So the next question she asked me was, have you ever journaled before? And I said, what? And she said, well, people do this in different ways. Some people write, some people do art, some people use music, play instruments and whatever, write songs. But there's different ways of doing it. And you just, what's your poison, basically? And I said, well, I write. She said, great. I want you to take a pad of paper and a pen, put it by your bed. And before you go to bed, I want you to take everything that's swirling around in that head and put it on the paper. And she says, and Susan, it doesn't even have to make sense. And I said, oh, okay. Like, I was so skeptical. I was just like, there is no way this is going to work. No way. Not this simple little thing. And that night I went home, I got a pad of paper and a pen. And before I went to bed, I wrote. I took everything out of my head and I put it on the paper. And that night I got 2 hours of sleep. And I thought, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And the next night I got more sleep. And by the third night, I was sleeping like a baby. And I woke up the next morning and it was light outside and I was just confused. I thought, how did this happen? I don't get it. I went back to her the next week and she said, how did it go? And I said, well, I've been sleeping for 3 days or 4 days. So it obviously worked. And she said, great, keep doing it. Keep doing it. And I still journal. So each thing that I was going through, the next thing we were dealing with was my anxiety and my nervous system just being all kinds of out of whack and causing me constant panic attacks and anxiousness. And so at that point, I was very lucky because my therapist, she was kind of ahead of her time at that time. She had done research on other modalities that weren't mainstream. So I was kind of her guinea pig. we learned, I learned tapping techniques, which, you tap different parts of your body and you create a shift in your thinking, with affirmations and things like that.
Yeah, I've heard Tony Robbins use the same thing at
Yeah,
points, like to
it's
get different parts of your
powerful.
body
Yes,
working. Yeah.
yes. And a lot of it has to do with your chakra systems and all of that. But it it was important because I was learning tools that I would be able to use my whole life. And so there wasn't just one modality that worked for me, right? I had to try different things. And I did. And I tell people all the time, it's not a one size fits all. And everybody's trauma is different and their journey is different. And I one of the little things that I say to people who are struggling with therapy or struggling to find a therapist is that it is your healing. It's not theirs. So you have every right to interview your therapist and make sure they're the right fit. Make sure they understand that they are trauma competent in the type of trauma that you've gone through and that they're able to utilize those particular modalities to help you heal. It's so important because if you don't have that, if you don't have that person, you are not able to be completely vulnerable. And vulnerability is what leads to healing, truly healing. And I'm totally honest, it sucks. It sucks. It's hard. It was one of the most difficult things I ever did in my life, but I wouldn't take it back. I'm a completely different person. And I no longer have what happened to my dad have a hold over my life in the way it used to. Um, I'm able to see things clearer. And that's a part of the healing. And the other advice is that understand too that you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. And you have to learn to give yourself grace on the days that you're struggling. Because let me tell you, when I started to write my book, I had to dive deep. It took me 4.5 years to write this thing. I had to dive deep, relive, feel all the feels, but this time I had the tools to bring me out of those emotions. But there were days where I was done. Like I had nothing left, and I'm a real estate professional. I can't I had days where I was like, sorry, clients, I can't. Uh-uh. And I had to give myself grace with no guilt. That's the key. Because people will say, yeah, I give myself grace, but then you're sitting doing something else and thinking, oh, I should be doing this and I should be making money or I should be talking to this person or I should be handling my business and I should, you know what I mean? So it's like, nope, nope. You give yourself grace with no guilt. Go out, find something that grounds you, take a walk, stick your feet in grass, like whatever it is that you need to regulate your nervous system and kind of come back to center is what you need to do. And I had to do that throughout writing the book because there were those days.
So what made you decide to write the book?
I just got to the point in my healing that I knew I was ready. I was 50 years old when I decided. There's something about 50, and I don't know what it is, but 50 hits, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, I gotta, I've been wanting to do this thing, and now I gotta do this thing, right? So I kind of like drew a line in the sand and said, this is it. I'm starting now. And initially, I was writing it obviously for me and for the cathartic side of that. But the other side of that was that I realized there was still so much anger and pain and sadness around my dad's death from other law enforcement people who knew the story, who knew my dad, who knew. And so I thought, if they can see me, if they can see my healing, if they can see that I could rise above this and that I can give them hope, that maybe for them it would help them heal as well. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there are people outside of law enforcement that have gone through things that maybe they have had no hope, or they feel like they're alone, or they don't know where to start in the journey, and I thought, that's who I'm writing this book for. That's who I want. I want to give people that moment that I had where I felt hope and I was grateful in that moment, and I knew I wasn't alone in the journey any longer, and that I was going to heal. And I finally could see that down the road, I could have the life that I've always wanted and make a difference in people's lives by doing it. Now, there was fear,
I'm sure there
a
was.
lot of fear, because when you put your life out there like that, it's terrifying. And I knew that I would just picture those people that were out there, those faceless people that needed to hear this message, that needed that hope and that healing. And it allowed me to bulldoze through any fears that I had. The purpose became more important to me than the actual fear that I felt. And that was the most important. That's what brought me to my purpose
Yeah.
of helping others. And it's not so much what I went through that's the most important thing. It's the journey of the healing that's the most important thing.
I think
So,
that's why you're truly more of an inspiration, because of what you had to go through to get to that healing. But all that pain was for a purpose to
yeah.
give to somebody else.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I talk to people every day. I talk to people who have gone through things. I have had aha moments because I've even met people who have had trauma. It was childhood trauma, but because it was a normal environment for them and it happened in other family with other family members and things like that, they thought this was their normal. And, and it was abuse, but it was normal for them. And so they didn't realize, and a lot of these people were dealing with, sobriety issues and, um, you know, addiction issues and things like that. And I went through that with my own family members. My mom drank and my brother did drugs, and there's no shame in that. There's no, I don't, there's no blame in that. There's no judgment in that, because everybody deals with trauma differently. And so, and everybody deals with loss differently, right? And it may not be healthy. Certainly what I was doing with the masking was not healthy either. But I feel like when I met this young lady who told me her story after kind of picking up my book and seeing my book, and then she told me her story, I just realized that there were people walking this earth that have had some kind of trauma, and that trauma has led to behaviors that they can't understand. They can't understand why they can't stop drinking. They can't stop drugging. You know what I mean? And so I think it's really important to really circle on or dive in to figure out what that is. You know, what was the incident? What was the abuse? What was the whatever, whatever you went through.
Yeah.
And that was a big aha moment for me, because I guess for myself, I just thought if someone goes through trauma, they know what they've gone through trauma, right? But not necessarily. Not
No, I mean,
necessarily.
everybody masks their problems in different ways, like you said. I mean,
Exactly.
I know for me, because I had so much problem dealing with like deaths of people in my family and everything, and I turned to alcohol and drugs. But that was the only way I knew how to deal with it. Those were the
Right.
skills I was given, you know?
Exactly. It's a coping
Yeah.
mechanism.
And until I
Um,
learned how to heal, like
right.
your journey of healing, going through that on my own, it's the same way. It's like, okay, now it's time to give up all that stuff.
Right. Exactly. For you,
Yeah.
for you. And, that was the other thing, is this woman was going to rehab for the third time. And I asked her, why did you go to rehab the first two times? And she said, for her kids. And I said, why are you going now? And she said, for me. And I was like, bingo. Um, and I explained to her, like, when you do heal and you heal for yourself, it's a ripple effect. The people and the loved ones around you who see you heal, it allows them to heal as well,
Yeah.
and so you, you really need to make yourself, and, she's just like, but I feel so selfish. And I said, no, that's not selfishness. You are learning to love yourself, and you're learning to do something for yourself. And that is the most important thing that you can do in this world. We're given a very short amount of time on this planet. And, we weren't put on this earth to hate ourselves.
No. Like you can't help anybody else until you help yourself
Exactly.
either. I mean,
Exactly.
if you're just
Right.
draining yourself, helping
Yep.
everybody out, trying to help everybody else, I mean, your
Yep.
cup's gonna be empty and you have
Empty.
nothing to give.
You
You
can't
can't
give
have nothing for
anything. Yeah,
yourself.
exactly. So, in writing the book, that was one of the things that I really wanted to um, portray. I wanted to put it out there. And the book, the way we did it is we did it in two parts. So the first part is the trauma that I've gone through, and I've had stackable trauma through my life. But the second part was how I got through it, because I wanted to give people practical things that they can do for themselves, but also to see how healing affects another human being. Like, what does that look like to heal? And I think I did a pretty good job of describing that, or, allowing my readers to feel that part. And I've even had feedback from another agent who lost her husband to COVID. He was extremely healthy man, and he was gone in 5 days. And it just threw her. And um, she was struggling, and I could see it on social media. And I reached out to her. I didn't know her very well, just like a Facebook friend kind of thing. And I reached out to her and I said, hey, I just wrote this book, and maybe in some sort of way it will help you. I would like to gift it to you. And she said, oh, that would be amazing. And so I gave it to her, and she read it on a vacation. and messaged me back, and she said, I want to thank you for writing this book. And I said, oh, well, that's lovely. And she said, but I got to tell you something. I was your mother. And I said, what? And she said, you reminded me of my behaviors when I was drinking, because that's what she started to do to cope with her husband's death, that she, you know, it was reminding her how it was affecting her daughter during that time. And it was powerful for her because she was going for her sobriety. And she said, I needed that reminder. Thank you very much. Like it brought it in front of her. And I got to tell you, that was not one of the scenarios that ran through my head. I didn't think of it, someone connecting in that way. I
Yeah.
had no
You
idea.
never know how it's going to touch and affect
No,
somebody once you put it out there.
exactly. So, I mean, again, anytime somebody buys my book, reads my book, gives me a review, I'm so grateful in that moment. And I'm just happy to be able to help people have some hope when they feel hopeless.
Yeah. Where can our listeners get a copy of your book?
So my book is on Amazon. It is in 3 different ways you can get it. It's a paperback book. It's also on Kindle. So if you're a Kindle Unlimited um, membership, you can read it for free. And then I also went into the studio and narrated my own book. So it
Nice.
is on Audible.
Nice. What inspired you to start coaching then?
Oh my gosh. I think it was because I realized that for myself personally, I got to the point where after I had done the work with a professional therapist, that I was still stuck because I was a different person. So you get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm a different person. Now what? Now what? What do I do now? And I found coaching through real estate actually, and I had a transformational coach that changed my life because I realized that a lot of the trauma also brought up a lot of the programming that I had. And a lot of that programming was something I had to break because it was following me in being a parent, and being a wife, and being a business owner, and I needed to break that. And so a lot of it was that whole mindset from the time I was 17 of I just have to do this myself. I have to figure this out myself. And so throughout the years and throughout the time that I was working and, doing different things, I was a people pleaser horribly. And I ran around like a chicken with my head cut off because I felt like everything had to be done by me. I didn't want to put the burden on anyone else. And people would come to me and say, how can I help you? How can I support you? And my brain would say, no, no, no. This is my burden. It's not yours. I'll handle it. Right. So I had to learn to let go. And coaching helped me do that. And it guided me into really kind of figuring out, that's how I figured out about my coaching, because it's followed me. I was a hairdresser, and they always say we're armchair therapists, right? Um, and then I got into real estate, and I was coaching agents on mindset. And then after that, as my coach and I realized that I needed to make a difference in a different way is when the coaching came into play. And I thought, you're right. I can connect with people on a different level than a productivity coach could,
Yeah. Way
right?
more because of what you've been through.
Exactly. And I can guide them in a way that allows them to figure out what to do with this new person moving forward. Like, what kind of career were you looking at that you felt like because you were in this unhealed state of mind that you were not able to do this, right? Now you're healed or you're healing. So let's move you forward. Let's figure out what that looks like for you. Or maybe you've gotten into bad relationships in the past because you had rose colored glasses on,
Yeah.
or whatever the case is, people pleasing, right? Not being your authentic self, molding yourself into being something that you're not. And so that's where the coaching came into play. I meet them where they are, and we just go from there.
Nice. So what types of services do you provide?
Well, I am a speaker. So I have done a lot of podcasts, a lot. I've done virtual stages, I've done personal stages, international stages, and honestly, that is my thing. That is my jam. I love connecting with people. And so when I'm on that stage and I'm looking into your eyes, I like that connection. I like to be able to know that there's someone in my audience that connects with what I'm saying, and maybe that I can help that one person. My biggest goal in life is to be in front of 10,000 people, like on a stage in front of 10,000 people.
You getting close to it?
I'm moving towards there.
Yeah.
My friends think I'm nuts. I mean, they're just like, no way, no way.
Yeah.
But I'm so passionate about what I talk about that for me, I feel like people need to hear the message. I'm just the messenger, by the way. I'm just the messenger. I've given the message and I am putting it out to the public. And I feel like it's more important now than ever, that people really start to heal themselves.
Yeah.
And so the more people I can get in front of, the better.
I love it. How can people get a hold of you?
I have a website. It's my one-stop shop. I kind of joke around about it. Um, it is susansnowspeaks.com. It has information on my speaking, it has information on my coaching, and it has information on my book as well.
Awesome. And I'll put that in the show notes for everyone too.
Awesome.
Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to talk about?
No, I think, for me, I feel like I want people to walk away with the feeling that they're not alone. That is the most important, right? That there is hope, that you can heal from whatever it is that you're going through. It's not easy, it is a journey. And as long as you find that professional that understands your type of trauma, that can guide you in the right way with the modalities that you need specifically, that your life could change for the better, and what it would look like to wake up and be the person that you've always wanted to be. And that's what I want for people. That's everything I want for people, is to be able to find that hope and find that strength to make that decision to heal themselves.
Yeah. Great message. All right, final question. What is one piece of advice you'd like to leave our listeners with about overcoming adversity?
Well, here's the real deal, folks. We all go through stuff, right? And you can't compare yours to anyone else. I have that a lot where people go, I've never gone through anything like yours. No, you may not have, but you've gone through your own experience, right? I can't understand what you've gone through. That was your experience. So I think for me, I would say if there's something in you, that you feel like, I just don't want to feel like this anymore. I don't want to feel depressed anymore. I don't want to get up in the morning and just feel this heaviness in my body anymore. That is your body, that is your mind telling you it's time. It's time to find your strength, pick up that phone, and call somebody who can help you in your journey of healing.
Great advice. Well, Susan, I can't thank you enough for coming on here and sharing your inspiring story
Thanks
of
for
hope
having
and
me.
healing.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Well, guys, that's going to be all the time we have here today. Remember, the only way to get what you want is go through the fire.